I'm Kristof, and welcome to the API Resilience Podcast. If you've ever wondered what it really is we do when we do APIs, and if you've wondered how APIs change organizations, our communities, and our society, look no further. This is the podcast you've been searching for.
So today, I'm really excited. I say this all the time, maybe, but I am actually really excited to be talking with Ronald Ashri, who I don't know how long we go back, but I think it's at least 10 years.
Yeah.
I think if it's not more. Yeah. We got to know each other in the Drupal community. Mm-hmm. And when we recently had a check-in, I realized that actually you had been doing work in agentic research before you got into the Drupal community. So that was like, wow, okay. And because you're actually working on an AI startup, if I can classify it like that, called OpenDialog, I thought it would be really interesting to have a conversation about what all of this stuff is going on and how you're approaching this, maybe what role APIs are playing in your stack. That could be an interesting one. What role of documentation is in all of that, in making it possible. Yeah, and like what works and what will probably not work, and like fact checking all the hype that's going on. So that because I've been talking with people about how do we accelerate the process or the AI disillusionment that is definitely going to happen. Like how do we speed through that? Because it's actually really cool technology.
That's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah. With that very long introduction, hi, Ronald. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So can you, maybe to kick things off, can you talk a little bit about yourself? Like, how did you end up in agentic research? And let's start there. So for people I think most people will have some idea about agents already, but still, can you maybe give a short summary of like, how did you end up studying agentic technologies? And what is that exactly?
How much time? Yeah. I started, university, right? I did computer systems engineering, and this is in the UK at Warwick University. And in my final year of my undergraduate degree, and this is, I'm going to date myself, but this is like late 90s, early 2000, right? Some time ago, was sort of looking for a final year project to do. And I came across this new cool distributed technology called Genie, which was a specific Java framework that enabled you to call processes on a different computer and get a response back, right? So I said, oh, this is really cool. I want to do a project around this and somehow mix it with AI. And in the process of doing that, I realized, when you have different software programs on different environments and they're calling each other and they're trying to coordinate to solve a problem, there is a field of AI research called multi-agent systems that studies this problem. In my final year project, I got into that and I built a little multi-agent system based on Genie. And because Genie was a new thing, the web was a new thing, multi-agent systems was exciting at that point in time. I became like a little Genie expert in my final year at university, and British Telecom emailed me just out of the blue saying, we love what you're doing with Genie. We want to sponsor a PhD. Are you interested in doing a PhD? Which I was interested in doing. And I went and worked at their labs for some time and doing agents. Yeah, that's how it got started.
So those agents back then primarily were about like populations, like you have a lot of interacting players and then you're looking for emergent behavior, or how was that exactly?
Okay, so that's an interesting aspect, right? Because actually there are various different aspects to this idea of an agent. What you're referring to is more agent-based modeling. And this is an interesting mixture of economics, sociology, and computer science that says, how we want to model out societies and see how things would behave at scale. So we're going to build our smaller agents, put them into some sort of environment, give them some incentives. It could be economic incentives. It could be biologically managed incentives like ants or bees and so on. and let's see what happens, right? Let's see what sort of emergent behaviors come out of that. And that's one area of using the idea of an agent, so an individual goal-driven process, interacting with other things. Now, associated with that or next to that, there is the idea of using the concept of an agent for building more for software engineering, right? So you're saying you have functional programming, you have object-oriented programming, agent-based programming, right? That is, so your base concept is that of an agent. And especially if you're building distributed systems where each different system has some capabilities, it has some goals and so on, and you're trying to coordinate them. So, okay, that's how do I engineer those systems? So I was more on the agent-based software development side of things. How do we use the concept of an agent to engineer systems rather than how do we use the concept of an agent to run simulations and learn things about economic systems or social systems and so on. And there's a lot of overlap. You end up thinking about the same sort of problems, but it's different areas of research.
So you did your PhD on agentic technology with Genie. Then how did you end up?
First, I'm going to nitpick.
Yeah.
I don't know what agentic is.
Yeah.
Agentic is something that popped up in the last year and a half. We never use that word. So it's just interesting. I know what you mean. What I did so I played around with Genie, then left that. What my PhD was in is really digging into this idea. How do you engineer systems using the concept of an agent as your building block? So we spent a lot of time thinking about what agency is. Like, how do you define it? In the same way that if you take object-oriented programming, I have classes and objects are instantiations of these classes, and you have methods and parameters and so on, and you create patterns, different ways you can combine objects to solve specific types of problems and so on. It's taking that and saying, okay, how do we do that with agents? What's the base definition of an agent? If we talk about goals, what is a goal? There's things like what is a motivation or what's a plan and so on. And we actually defined all of this in formal logic. And then we use it to build systems. And there's a whole software engineering methodology around it. And it ended up in all sorts of weird places. But that was the idea. I think the PhD was called something like Infrastructures for Agent-Based Systems or something like that, which is essentially what are all the things that you need to start designing multi-agent systems.
Very cool. And thank you for that correction. I think there's a lot of words being repurposed and coins today for very clever marketing reasons.
Absolutely.
Yes. So, and then how did you end up in Drupal?
Life happens. So I was in academia for a few years, and then I guess I got a little disillusioned with academia and said, I'm going to take a year off and do something else. In the meantime, I had met my wife. My wife is from Sicily. We moved to Sicily and opened a cookery school. So something completely different, right? And this is the only way I can explain how I got into Drupal. So it's a bit of a roundabout thing, but we opened a cookery school. This cookery school required a website. I have a PhD in computer science by that time, so I am supposed to build a website now.
You're the software guy.
Right? Yeah. So I started looking around and I found WordPress. I said, oh, okay, that sort of makes sense. And I remember I built something in WordPress, didn't really like it. Then I built something in Joomla, saying, oh, this is horrible. And then I came across Drupal, and so the last thing I was doing in academia was the semantic web. And so I said, oh, this is complicated and nerdy. I like this content management system. This is how I think about things. Tells a lot about Drupal, right? Yes. A PhD in computer science wanting to build a website said, oh, this is sufficiently complicated. Started doing that website in Drupal. Then I ended up doing a bunch of other things for other people. I realized there's an RDF world in Drupal. And as we were doing the Cooker School, I started consulting in building Drupal sites and combining RDF and consulting with libraries and universities and so on. And then I said, oh, they have conferences, let's go. And before you know it, like I was running a little Drupal agency from Sicily, working with people all over the world.
Yeah.
It was nice days when Drupal was a bit less mature and there's all sorts of things going on. It was good times.
So, and where did the whole semantic Drupal thing actually end up? Because there was a lot of excitement back then, and then that died down a bit. Although that I think today, like we would almost have to revive that era, because I think today it would be incredibly relevant to have these.
And there is really interesting work in knowledge graphs and LLMs now, and how the knowledge graphs can provide grounding for the LLMs. Yeah.
So it was sufficiently complicated, but can I rephrase that? It was sufficiently powerful.
Yes, that is fair. To this day, even though I'm not doing any work in Drupal these days, but I think Drupal got so many things right the first time around, right? In terms of flexible content types and so on and so forth. And it's that usual technology story of, but in order to get these things right, there's a few concepts around it and a bit of a structure and a model. And that's always a bit of a learning curve for people.
Yeah. But it's like a tool that allows you to build a lot of basically structured content models, and then very, very cool. And then how did you get started with OpenDialog?
So doing Drupal for a bunch of years, mostly in this sort of knowledge management space, although we did a bunch of other types of websites as well. And then in 2017, conversational AI started becoming a thing. I think there was a few things that happened that year, which are actually interesting lessons for LLMs these days. Facebook had released a chatbot, which I think lasted for maybe less than a year, and then they removed it. Microsoft was out there declaring in 2017, this is pre-transformer, let alone GPTs and so on, that applications are dead, chatbots are the new applications. This was Microsoft in 2017. This story is out there and PR that Microsoft was doing. What was real at the time is that NLU technologies, and we're talking more sort of classifiers and so on, were getting interesting. And my intuition was, this is interesting. This is different type of technology. I was looking to move away from CM. And I thought the work that I used to do in agent-based systems to engineer systems where you have multiple entities that are communicating, coordinating, and collaborating was applicable to this conversational AI space. But the way I saw it was, okay, so you have this thing that you're trying to build, which is a chatbot at the time, and you have a human being, and these two things need to communicate, coordinate, and collaborate to solve a problem. The system that you're engineering is not the chatbot. It's this entire thing with two entities within it. One happens to be, let's call it fully autonomous, not necessarily, depending on your philosophy of the human being. And the other thing, which is the chatbot, which is more limited, but still has like its own goals and motivations and so on. So I thought, great, we could bring like ideas from multi-agent systems. It's a small agent system. There's just two agents in it, but you can design systems using this approach. So that was the thing that was in the back of my mind. What we started doing is we created a company that did consulting around conversational AI, and we're using the tooling that was out there. You already had Dialogflow from Google, Lex from Amazon. There was a couple of open source things like Spacey and Rasa at the time. So we're playing around with all these things. And in the background, within this consultancy, as ever, you're building a product, right? Like you're secretly building a product. the consultancy got acquired by a much bigger consultancy, and we continued to secretly build this product to the point where we gave it a name, OpenDialog, and it became a bit of a thing. And then our new acquirer said, "Oh, you're building a product. You're supposed to be selling your time. We're a consultancy." Said, "Yes, but we can combine the two," and so on. And to be fair to them, they actually bought into the idea that this is a really interesting product. They invested in it, and then we spun out of this consultancy, got some seed investment. Initially, I think it was like 4 million, and we were OpenDialog AI Limited, a UK startup in the conversational AI space.
What year was this?
Hold on, let me get this right. I'm terrible with years and so on. This was 2022, I think. 2022 by the time we spun out and so on. Yeah.
So that was still before the big hype.
Still before. Actually, I remember the summer. So ChatGPT was released, I think it's December 2023, and that was 3.5. That summer, we were running experiments internally to see what we could do with GPT-3. And what we have concluded is, this is super interesting. We can use it to generate some test data. We can use it in the back end, but absolutely we can't expose users to this. They cannot have a conversation with it. It's not reliable. You from any measure, even if you wanted to be super positive, you couldn't do something with it. Then 3.5 comes along, and that was a real moment. Like for me, the only other moment, technologically speaking, where I felt, wow, this is amazing, is literally the internet. It's a big moment. Yeah.
And so you're building this startup. You're already doing AI. Then hits the tsunami. So one thing is like how you reacted, but I imagine that suddenly you were like a really hot commodity because like how did that work for you? Like how did it affect you?
So yeah, absolutely. Like it helped everything that we were doing. But I think there is a difference there's a lot of hype, right? So to be blatantly straightforward, like from an investment perspective, an investment thesis, it really helped. In that it's much easier to explain what's happening and people are excited about it. It doesn't actually change the reality of problems that you're trying to solve for people. Because there's a lot of organizational friction in these problems, maybe we can talk a bit about, but it definitely changes the perception. And you have to manage it carefully, right? Because we were not an LLM company, right? We're not building our own models. We were building a specific way of building reliable and trustworthy conversational applications for regulated industries. And now you have this amazing machine in the form of GPTs that you can plug in. But even back then, the hallucination issue was really serious. Like it's amazing ChatGPT got to where it got to as a product just because it felt so magical. But the level at which it would make up stuff back then was horrendous. So you imagine that in our space of regulated industries, we have to take a very measured approach of how you introduce it, how you manage it, and so on. So yes, it did help, but you still had to be very careful.
So maybe it's a two-edged sword. It both helped and actually made things worse because now you had to somehow fit your story against that overhyped story of
That's true. And I think one of the problems we solved from a conversational perspective, right? If you think pre-transformers, kind of 3.5 level of GPTs, it was complicated to have fluid conversations. That's why people hated chatbots, right? It's, oh, sorry, could you rephrase that? I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you're saying, and so on. And what we were doing is providing this overarching structure that gave you a much clearer sense of what the context of the conversation is, so that you can continue the conversation and you can make up for the shortcomings of the NLP systems that you're using. When you now take out those NLP systems and introduce transformer-based technology, the job of the overarching structure is to constrain while before it was, I'll give you a helping hand so we can talk more about things. Now it's no, we don't want you talking about things, right? It's the opposite. So it's interesting, and it took us some time to figure out how we were going to do that from an engineering perspective and so on. But we switched from, oh, let me help you have a conversation, to let me stop you from having the wrong types of conversation.
Yeah. I heard you refer to a couple of things, and that made me realize that there's some interesting topics that I want to dig a little bit deeper on. Because you were talking about OpenAI as a product. And I think we've talked in a previous conversation, we've talked about this, that LLMs, they might actually be utility that is in an early phase, that actually this objective that ChatGPT has put as its goal of becoming the utility of everything, or a utility for artificial intelligence, that is maybe not the right thing to do, or for this kind of technology, and that it's more useful to think about these technologies as something that then is constrained by some product to become actually useful. How do you see that right now? Do you also, what Microsoft said in what you said 2017, like they've said it again.
Yeah,
they've
right.
done it again.
Same person as well, still the same CEO, saying the same thing.
So, and for people that don't, if you haven't seen this, Satya Nadella mentioned or said that SaaS is dead, and that basically this AI is going to make it obsolete, and that basically we're only going to have, no, he didn't say this, but then in 2017, basically he said it's all going to become conversations rather than products. What is your take on this right now? Because you're building a product that is under the hood using LLMs, that is using maybe even some of these commercial models. What is your take on this? Because a lot of people are, or like one way you could look at it is say, like, yeah, it's not worth to try to build products on top of this technology because AI is going to be able to do everything anyway, kind of thing. Or how do you see this right now?
So
why won't it? Maybe that's the real question here.
So I think there's lots of different facets to it, right? And to make it make sense in my head, I have to think about it. Let's take ChatGPT as that product, right? Because the real innovation there was to package it up and present it as a product. Here you go, anyone can use it, right? Because from an LLM perspective, obviously 3.5 was a great achievement, but there were other similar things at the time. So if you think of ChatGPT as a product, that initial version was very impressive. It did the marketing job, but it wasn't a very good product. Like, you just had these conversations. It sort of said, oh, I can make mistakes, check it, but it would just go ahead and say anything. And it was this just one way, here's a bunch of text, or maybe you want an image, here's an image, right? And actually what's happening now is UX is trying to catch up, right? So the user experience, okay, what problem is a user actually trying to solve? They're trying to understand something on the web, or I think Anthropic with Claude have something really interesting in that idea of artifacts, right? And okay, yes, there is a conversation over here, but there's other bits of UI that are very important in the overall experience, and we have to invest in everything, right? So they sort of run ahead, took the space, captured people's imaginations, sold some snake oil initially, let's just be honest about it, right? Always saying, oh yeah, but we never said it was perfectly correct. All the other speech was, this is magical, this is, and now they're trying to catch up and bring real utility in it. And what is that really doing? It's constraining the conversations. It's putting the conversations into specific paths to say, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Because actually just having a back and forth about, there is a product in that, right? Just something I can talk to, and we will talk about anything, but it's just one type of product. It is not the everything. So you have to start introducing all these other products into it, whether it's search or, I don't know, tasks or deep research or whatever it is, the canvas, the artifact, and so on. Those are
maps.
Yeah. Those are all things that are required to help you solve a real problem. And I think in that respect, there's still a lot that we need to go, and we haven't solved, just like the early web, right, where you had your website with, I don't know, animated GIFs and so on and all sorts of things going on. We haven't really solved the problem of what is good user experience with these machines in the back end that are able to talk about anything.
But I think for me, the question is this a product or is this a tool that you use inside of a product? Because I think we're trying to be sold onto this idea that everything needs to be a conversation, or they really want to become the destination of the web or the replacement of the web. But yeah.
No, I completely agree. And I actually think it's worse than that, because it's not just this conversational interfaces, right? The assistants, where there is a big question of should everything just live within the assistant? But even if you look at the developer-facing products that the OpenAIs offer, there's something specific there in that they're saying the end all and be all of this is the prompt.
Yeah.
So, for example, you have some APIs over here, right? How are you going to talk to those APIs? Oh, we're going to give you tools. How do you access tools? Through a prompt. The LLM, you're going to give it some description of the thing, but the LLM is going to decide how to call, when to call the API, and what values to pass through, and so on. So there is this thing of removing, talking about agents, you're removing agency from the developer and saying you're essentially try and explain in English what you want, and it's going to go and figure it out. And even to the level of saying, oh, and then you also have Hugging Face, like really promoting this, is let it write its code. Right? So Hugging Face in their latest framework, small agents, essentially making the case that instead of maybe structured output from the LLM that then you pass on to an API or you pass on to tools through the LLM, but it's structured JSON. So no, let it write the code. And the code then is going to call the API and so on. You just deal with the prompt. Right? That's your entry into everything. And to me, that's very insidious because it's hiding everything behind the LLM. The LLM takes care of everything. And I think it's not malicious, like there isn't some grand plan. I think the bit that we're forgetting is that all these companies want AGI, right?
Yeah.
Artificial General Intelligence. How do you build a system that gets to AGI? It has to do everything. And otherwise, how can it?
General.
It's general. So it has to write its code. It decides when to call APIs or not, what to do with the output from the APIs and so on. But that doesn't mean every application we build as developers today, which is definitely not AGI, needs to be based on the same software engineering principles that you would use if you wanted to build AGI. And we've never really questioned it. To be fair, within OpenDialog, we do question it and we don't use tools in the same way and so on. But, talk to developers every day and say, you just integrate everything into the LLM. Are you sure that's, at least ask the question, is that the only way? I'll leave it there.
So is the LLM the routing layer, or is the LLM like a small thing that helps you to do very specific jobs that it's really well fit for? And I think that's and I think it's more the second one. Like I think the LLM is the routing layer. I've seen people do, let's see if we can do some sort of like a programmatic thing. Or the example everybody uses calculate me how much is use an LLM as a calculator. And this is a terrible idea. You're spending an enormous amount of energy, and it's not built for that. And yes, they can build some functions in their product, in their AI product, to do this kind of stuff, but that's no longer LLM technology. So then now we are entering the black box computing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, as I said, I think it's a perfectly valid approach to take if you want to build this general tool, or if you want to collect data about how a general tool should work.
Yeah.
Which is what these assistants really are. Like after everything that we've gone through with social media, election manipulation, Cambridge Analytica, you are the product, be careful, and so on, what do we do next? Yeah, let's go tell everything to to assistants. But if you look at every single company that has that level of assistant, what is their stated goal? AGI, right? Including Google, most recently with Sergey Brin, they're saying everyone at Google should work 60 hours a week so that we can get to AGI, which, I'm sorry, is the most absurd statement I've ever heard. Yeah, everyone work more to build something that's going to make you irrelevant. I just don't. Anyway, they all want to get to AGI. That is the goal. And again, leaving maybe some of the politics of this aside, just from an engineering perspective, that leads you to different decisions than if you're saying, no, I just need, I don't know, summarization, or I need to be able to collect a bit of data conversationally before I call an endpoint. Why am I calling the weather service through an LLM if all I need to know is the weather, when, where? I got that. I can go figure out how to call the weather service. I don't need the LLM to do it. It's a different problem they're solving, and they're building technology for that problem.
And it's so like expanding from some smaller seats or contracting or translating into another domain language or something. Those are things that work fairly well. But then,
and that I think is the tragedy that we will face, because LLMs are actually amazing technology. I don't think there's any technologist out there that will say this is not the coolest thing ever. This is what we grew up watching Star Trek or whatever, and yes, it's finally technology that feels like that, right? It's amazing technology. It has utility today. There's lots of real problems that you can solve with LLM. We are going to get a backlash because we're pushing it too far. We're shoving it down everyone's throat too much. I wrote something recently around the AI maximalist, right? Just put AI in front of, I don't know how annoyed I am with Gmail on the phone. I put Gemini right on the side where I used to click for search or something, and now Gemini keeps popping up. There's going to be a backlash. And we're going to lose out on the fact that we have actually useful technology that can solve problems, and we should be taking advantage of it.
If we're going back to Gmail, I would love to have those I would love to be able to use AI features for very specific things. But to turn that annoying UX thing in the mobile app off, you have to turn off. I think I had to actually turn off AI features as a whole, because it's basically UX failure. But it's the objective that's wrong.
I'm not sure, if I think of it from a product perspective, I'm not quite sure what the objective is. I'm not sitting in those meetings in the big AI companies, right? But it costs them to run it. The users are quite clearly saying, it's just what you said. I want it for some things, but not others. So as a product manager, you would be saying, okay, how can we present it when users actually want it, but remove it when they don't? And the only thing I sort of makes sense in my head is we need the data. We need more data. We need more people interacting with it. So put it everywhere on the one hand, and then the other side is the pressure of we have to be seen to lead in this.
The thing is, Google had a lot of AI before the whole OpenAI tsunami, but they were applying it very diligently in very specific areas, and now they've thrown the accelerant on it to make it much more. And I think there's some areas like NotebookLM that are amazing. Also the summaries, the transcripts, like taking notes, those are amazing. They're really cool applications, and it's really augmenting the Google products a lot. But then there's certain areas where it's just pulled by the hairs, and then it becomes negative instead of a positive.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think this also hints a little bit to is AI a product or a feature? And I think it's more, or even something even lower level, like our LLM technologies just a piece of your computing stack that's enabling a new capability, or is it really the product and I think it's rather the latter than the first. I don't think that I think the searching with LLMs can be really cool. Sometimes just having a conversation with LLM can be really cool because you can ask questions or you can ask it to ask questions, which is very cool. It can be because you can actually have a conversation and learn a lot from it. But
I think what you said there is exactly the problem, right? Is when you think of AI as a feature, and unfortunately a lot of even how SaaS companies or product companies in general talk about it is, oh, we have AI now. There's no other feature that they talk about in the same way. You can, I don't know, I'm a CRM company, you can see a better report of your sales. Okay, I get what that is. But I have AI. What does that even mean? Right? And there is, when I do talks and training around AI, and we get to the point of what is AI? My definition of AI is a field of research. It is a science. It studies intelligence and it tries to build systems. It generates hypotheses about what is intelligence, and then the scientists build models to validate or not those hypotheses. It is science. In the same way, math is a science and physics is a science. Do you have any product that says, hey, come look at our new math features? It doesn't make sense, right? Or we now have physics. No, those are just sciences. There's a specific functionality, whether it's search, whether it's categorization, synthesis, there's a specific thing that you have. That is your feature, not AI. But that's not how the marketing world went, right? AI is somehow a selling point.
Yeah, and that will probably invert really rapidly to the minus point, because once the disillusionment hits, which is a pity because, again, there's a lot of really interesting applications.
Yeah.
So you said, so AI is a research field. It is trying to replicate intelligence. What is intelligence for you? What does it mean for you?
I think there is, so I don't know. It's the most honest answer. I don't have a good definition, right? I think it's the process through which we make decisions, right? So for me, it's you take a rock and I can tell you, oh, this rock does not have intelligence. Why does it not have intelligence? It doesn't make any decisions for itself, right? It's just there. And if I kick it, it's going to move and so on. But if I take a mouse, it makes some decisions for itself. It has some agency. It looks at the world and it reacts. So there's something that happens internally that said, okay, of path A, path B, path C that I could take, I'm going to take path A. How did it get to that decision? That process of how do I take in information and then decide to do something about it is intelligence.
Yeah.
And I think it can be extremely simple. It can literally be just one signal, it's on off. Intelligence is a continuum. So it can just sit there. It says, oh, something just pinged me, I'll switch off. Ping me again, I'll switch on. That's something. Or it can be human beings and systems of human beings and so on and so forth.
So, and are computers on that continuum for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Another example I always bring up is there is no test for intelligence. I know there's the Turing test and so on, but that tests something very specific, right, in terms of human intelligence and so on. But just general intelligence. Put your engineering hat on. If they told you can solve all the problems of the world with one switch that goes on, off. You just do that and it's all the problems get solved. It's fantastic. Why would you say, oh, but that's not a sufficiently complex or intelligent system? If it solves a problem, it's great. Why does it have to pass a test of intelligence, right? Now, it turns out that there are some problems that are not that simple, right? Looking at a picture of a cat. If you think of the evolution of AI and different ways of doing AI, right? So you have symbolic AI. Let's write down the rules. Or we're going to build a knowledge graph or an ontology, right? And okay, let's create something that will help us recognize a cat. has a head and two eyes and legs and so on, and you write all that down. And it turns out you can't actually write a good enough set of rules that will consistently look at a picture of a cat and recognize that it's a cat. So you say, actually, I need a neural network, and I need this much more fuzzy system with different layers, and I train it and so on to get. So that's a different type of intelligence, but it's because the simple way or the explicit symbolic way didn't work. So we go to a model-based neural approach. That doesn't mean that the symbolic way is not intelligent, or an if-then-else program is not intelligent. It's just that it can't solve a certain set of problems. So you need something different. Right? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it makes sense. So that just before this call, I was watching an interview with, well, it was about Gödel's theorem, incompleteness theorem. I think the professor, Roger Penrose, who's talking about, who's basically saying, AI or this computer AI cannot, like the way that it's currently being built as a computation thing, can never become intelligence. That's what he was saying, because it does not become conscious. I'm curious, what do you think? Is consciousness needed for intelligence? Or is there like a different type of, is there like an other type of conscious intelligence, or is this just consciousness? Or how do you see that? Like, so you said for you, intelligence is an ability to make decisions. How does consciousness feature into that? And then also, what do you think about Gödel's incompleteness theorem related to intelligence and computers?
So, yeah, I'm not a trained philosopher, so I can't
me neither
talk about this. I think there's something, just from a principle perspective, right? There's something really interesting there in saying what we're trying to do with LLMs and transformers in general, right? Is we're essentially, that sort of ties to this, is we're saying if you look at what is there, you will learn and you will be able to generate new things.
Yeah.
And we've done that extensively, right? We've literally had them look at everything that is there, figure out all the trillions of connections and probabilities of, given that I've seen this, what is the most likely next thing that can come up and so on. And I don't think, while yes, they do write poems and music and pictures and so on, they're not really doing new things. They're doing rehash of stuff that is out there. So there's something there to say, okay, something is missing. Now, is that consciousness? Is that a different way of understanding the world? I don't know what it is, but for sure something is missing. And then there's also if you think of how we learn, we don't read everything that was ever written, right? I don't know how we learn in sufficient detail, but I know that we don't read everything that was ever written and see everything that was ever posted on the web and so on. And yet we're able to do all these different things. So how do we do that? There is something, I don't know what that other ingredient, element, and so on is, but there is something there that we're missing. And maybe what Gödel is saying is we may never be able to find it, right? Like we cannot figure out ourselves. That's taking that principle to the extreme, is unless you're able to stand outside the universe and look in, you won't be able to figure out how it works because you're always part of it. Yeah. And so that's a philosophical analysis or amateurish analysis from myself. Then there's the very prosaic engineer in me that says, yeah, they don't have consciousness. They're just processors. And like we know what they're made up of. Like we understand that to intimate detail. Like this whole idea that maybe they have feelings, or I just cannot buy into it at all. And maybe I also admit that maybe it's just a limitation of mine, but I just can't get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know where I read this, but it was sort of laughing at changing norms, right? And it was saying probably people our generation, I don't know, 30 years from now, or maybe Gen Z, what will Gen Z not be happy about? And it might be that their kids will come along and say, I've fallen in love with a robot. And Gen Z say, you can't fall in love with a robot. How is that? Maybe it's just that sort of very human limitation, right? Maybe it's prejudice. I don't know. But right now, I can't see it.
But I think one big limitation that I see is just the nature of this technology, where we're trying to build a singular system that can function in all possible contexts, is its biggest Achilles heel, because that means that, like, when you build not agentic, but when you agent-based systems, the whole thing is that you have different agents specialized in different jobs that have different knowledge, that have different purposes. It's the difference that matters. And it's the combination of different systems that interact with each other that creates the magic of agentic systems, or of agent-based systems. Sorry.
By the way, there's nothing wrong with agentic, right? It's just it's just a new term.
Yeah, but no, I think agent-based systems for this is better, because agentic has too much AI hype connotations, I think. But so one model is one model. So it's a singular model that they're building. They're not building, maybe under the hood, they have different
actually, yeah, it's not necessarily, but still, I don't know, because it depends on your perspective, right?
But it's still funneling everything through that single interface. They're saying this AI session that you're having is replaceable with any other. The AI that's on the other end is not like, it could be learning about you, but it's not inside of the model that is learning. It's like maybe storing some contextual parameters about you and a profile about what you've been asking about and what you're interested in. But you don't have a model that is being adjusted to fit with that specific conversation that you have. It's just financially impossible, at least at this point. So there's no instantiation of that agent. It's a completely virtual thing that has been built, and it's a utility with a very thin layer of instantiation that we're getting. And because of that, I think that just that architecture, I think, limits the possibilities with it.
And there's something else to that, right? Which is why, if we think of consciousness, or from a philosophical perspective, from a cognitive psychology perspective, and so on, I think these things are really interesting to study, and that there's something there to go explore to understand ourselves. They're necessary concepts to understand ourselves, because even though we may not necessarily know exactly what consciousness is, realize that we have an internal dialogue, and there's some stuff that we do that is part of that. But in terms of building this engineered systems, these products that are supposed to solve problems, I don't know where consciousness comes in, right? To help me build a better system, or where a specific definition of intelligence comes in, which is one of the challenges I have to the idea of the hype around agentic systems, right? Where the start of the conversation, it said, yes, an agent-based approach can give me some engineering benefits in the same way an object-oriented approach can, and so on, right? All of that makes sense. But if I'm not using the concept of agency as something that helps me build a better system, why am I using it? Just because it's cool and it's different? Then it's marketing, which is fine. Like, I'm not, marketing has its function in the world, and that's a fight I've given up on. But if we're talking about building systems, you have to explain to me how thinking of your system as an agent-based system helps you build a better system.
Yeah. I think I asked you to read the Substack article about spaces versus tools. I think that an agent, it's like it has the potential to become a far from equilibrium place that has the specific context for certain interactions to happen that otherwise wouldn't be possible. So I think it's very similar to how, from what I've understood from how OpenDialog works, where you are creating a moving context window that you're taking an individual through to help them to achieve the job that they're trying to, or that they're supposed to get done. So I think that similarly, it's like replacing a graphical user interface where you have certain visual cues and certain experiences that you're familiar with that are catalyzing you to do a certain action. I think that similarly, agents are taking like or the dream is that you can bring this agent into a space rather than go into the space that used to be software. You bring the agent into your space, and then it's doing those jobs for you without you having to shift context. So it's doing the heavy lifting of context shifting instead of you. I think that's the promise that I see. And then basically you can have as many agents as you need to have different contexts to do like a certain workflow that you need to go through. And then there's where multi-agents thing comes in, or at least this is how I can imagine it being like extremely useful, even though that you still want to move into a certain context sometimes, because we don't only go into contexts to help us to do jobs, we also go into context to have experiences and to make us feel in a certain way or to interact with certain people. And there are certain contexts or certain, why do you go to, or at least we go very frequently, we go into town to go have a coffee. It's not because we want to drink coffee. It's because we want to have that experience of having a coffee. And I think Gen Z has a better feeling around this or understands this better than our generation. But I think it's somewhere here that I think what we're doing or where we're looking at. The risk is that we're looking at this and saying, oh, this is a replacement for everything. And now everything all software becomes a tool rather than a space. And we're just going to make it disappear because that kind of assumes that nobody wants to interact with software at all, that you would just like it to just magically be the genie that does work for you without you having to actually interact with it.
I agree. And I think people will react to that. I'm already seeing quite clear signs of how people are reacting to that. And they're actually saying there's certain things I like them to be in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And they're not saying no to agents as this idea of partially autonomous pieces of software that can go and do things for me. They're not saying no to that. They're saying no to the idea that somehow now everything gets reduced to that, or my own agency is removed and I don't get to choose when I can hand over to the software agent to do something or not, right? So I think you're absolutely right. Like spaces and user interfaces and user experience is not going to be one thing. It's just not.
It's really interesting. It just makes me think that there are certain experiences in software where deliberately agency is taken away. A checkout process where the menu is removed, there's no backlink, or there's one backlink, but you really don't want to click this because you're going to lose everything you just worked on. And those are generally not nice experiences. They're dehumanizing experiences, especially because a lot of those experiences, then a whole bunch of manipulative crap gets built in. You don't want the insurance. 80% bought the insurance before you. So that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think and as we said, this is such early days, but you're already seeing a backlash. So there's two phenomena, right? Mm-hmm. A backlash. What is this? I don't want it on my interface. Or, and this is what generates the hype, the fascination with the fact that it can even do this, where you get all these people talking so positively about these things. It was an example of someone using the OpenAI operator, right? So the operator is this agent, for those that don't know, that can essentially manipulate your browser, let's say, and it will go visit a website and click and so on instead of you. So this person went on social media, so excited to share a video clip where they gave the operator the instruction to go on some e-commerce site and get a yummy Japanese sweet. And isn't it amazing? It figured out where to go. It selected the sweet, it put it in the cart and did the checkout and everything. Amazing. Thinking, hold on, what's yummy? Like it just picked it. Does it know what is yummy for you? If a human being asked another human being, get me something yummy, I would say, what do you mean? Is that level of common sense is that extra sweet for you? Is it more salty thing? Is it like help me figure it out. While an LLM will just, oh, yummy, yeah, whatever. And I'll just go find some Japanese sweet, statistically probable that this would be a thing, and I'll select it. And we get super excited, and we don't question, it just translated something for you. Are you sure you're happy with that? And this is like the silliest example, right? Because if the suite is not the best suite, fine. But now they're talking about putting this same systems into the biggest organizations in the world, and they're deciding if they're going to fire someone or not. And it's the exact same technology. And that's where I think there is nothing wrong with being careful and conservative with this. We should pat ourselves on the back. We've created amazing technology. It's actually worth being a bit slower with it, rather than with this constant hype of let's do more, let's do faster.
But is it really a bit slower or a bit more deliberate? I think that for me,
that's a word.
Yeah, because I would say use it today. There's a lot of really interesting things you can do with it. It's just you have to know what it can do and what it can't do, and that's if you're trying to it will not tell you what it can't do. It will try, and it will fail, and so just understand it, understand what you're using.
It's a nice little example I use in a training course, which is this is Claude 3.7 Sonnet, the best of the best, right? And the question I asked is, give me some of the limitations of LLMs. It says the first limitation is hallucinations. And according to a study, up to 27% of facts that an LLM might say are hallucinated. So show that to students. And then you go to Claude and you say, where did you get that 27%? It's like, oh, I'm sorry, that was an error. I shouldn't have said that. And it says, it will so authoritatively say it's this, and then at a breath away, it will say, oh, I shouldn't have said
that.
And this is the latest model, right? This is the best. This is not 3.5 or something. This is GPT 3.5. This is the newest and best and so on, that has had extensive training and realignment and so on to not do things like that.
At the same time, super useful. So how do you use it in OpenDialog? How do you use LLMs then? Because you described that you had to go from giving a leg up to natural language processing technology to, actually containing no, you don't go there. Please stay on the top.
So there is, I think the quick way to describe OpenDialog is, you called it a sliding context window, right? Which essentially gives a grounding of what is it that we're trying to achieve right now, right? Maybe we're trying to do a checkout, or we're doing an insurance claim, or we're collecting some personal data. So you have that sense of what is the current goal. You have specific data that you can inject into prompts to give it some grounding. And then we use LLMs for all the usual things like classification, summarization, some basic common sense reasoning, but very carefully select where to use it. So it might be something like you're trying to figure out if a person is available to do a car pickup, right? And they might say something like, I have to take the kids to school. You can do that bit of reasoning that says, oh, you didn't say no, but the fact that you said you have to take the kids to school means that you're not going to be there. That's fine. That's not a complex problem. And it's within a specific context. That's the only thing that we're discussing. So even if that goes a bit wrong, we will very quickly catch it. That's the way we use it, right? We have our system, and it doesn't depend on a single LLM. We will use multiple models within a single AI agent, and we will use the smaller LLMs for the simpler tasks, and then just sprinkle more complex LLMs where you have to do something a bit more complicated. Where we use RAG, and so we inject knowledge into a prompt to reason about it, we take advantage of this, essentially this knowledge graph of the context and the conversation, to break a big problem into a very small problem.
Yeah.
And then the level of reliability and accuracy gets really high And because we work in regulated environments, really high means like 98, 99%, right? Because we will literally send these things to underwriters in insurance, and they care less about technology. They just say, yes, this is something that it's okay for it to say or not. But it's just because we're not trying to boil the ocean or have a single LLM do everything. It's a lot of engineering to make it a series of small problems that you can reliably solve.
Yeah. Yes, I saw this presentation at the API Days in Paris. I don't remember who it was. I need to go look it up. But she said that the first prototype was great with it. Like just generating a first prototype was great. But then every iteration, they were reducing more and more how much they were relying on the LLM or on AI. So that basically at the end result, you maybe have still like 20% AI.
Yeah.
Or, well, whatever you call this technology, Gen AI, or even though that you might have started for your initial prototype with much more. And that was really interesting. Are you using any documentation? Like you were talking about knowledge graphs that you're using to inject context into the prompt for an LM. Do you have like documentation systems that you're relying on to do some of this stuff? Or I don't know what are the applications are that you're primarily working in, but do you have any kind of applications that are in the space of documentation, like technical documentation and like interacting with technical documentation to generate some of these dialogues?
So I guess the closest thing we get to is we've built some prototypes of technical documentation, but we've never really had to stress test them. What we do spend time with is policy documents from insurance companies, right? Yeah. Which is essentially contracts. Say, here's what's included and here's what's not included. And the only way we can reliably make this a valid conversation is you have to combine the ability of the LLM to ingest these documents and do semantic search by embeddings and so on and find the relevant pieces, together with carefully and explicitly managing the context of the conversation. The context of the conversation means a few different things. It means you need to know who the user is. And it can start from, I just don't know who they are. So then you have to adjust your answers appropriately because you don't know who they are. Mm-hmm. Or if you know who they are, how does that change your prompts? And your prompts are the way you manage the LLMs, right? You can end up with a number of different prompts or dynamic prompts that will change behavior based on who the user is and what variables you inject into them. And then the third bit that you explicitly need to understand is, what is the user actually asking? Mm-hmm. And this is say the user says something like, okay, if I buy this insurance and I travel to France, will this cover my car if I'm right? So if you take all the documentation that an insurance company has and you send a phrase like this to it and you do semantic search, so many different things are going to light up. Yeah. Right? It's things about destinations, about coverage, and so across multiple documents. So really what you have to, but if you're able to say, okay, this is maybe someone that doesn't have an insurance yet, they're trying to figure out what to do. It's about coverage, it's about travel, it's about France. So you're sort of you're taking that phrase and extracting explicit symbols from it. Yeah. Saying, okay, it's coverage, it's France, and so on. And then you pass that even through a very simple hierarchical knowledge graph that says, okay, the topic is this, what documents are associated with that topic, and then I go and do semantic search on this subset of documents. Yeah. That's, from an engineering perspective, that's a very simple flow. You're just saying, give me some filters. I'm going to go and filter my documents down to a subset, and then I'm going to do my search on that subset, and I'm going to feed it into a prompt that at the same time has also been specialized for that type of information. And already that gives you a far more reliable answer, and it's manageable without complicated expertise around, complex RAG systems and so on.
But then you have to predetermine what kind of conversations people might want to have. where you have to start specializing the conversation flows that you.
Absolutely, that's the trade-off, right? But
yeah,
we build conversational AI agents for specific organizations that just need to have specific conversations. It's not ChatGPT.
Yeah,
needs to deal with everything.
So do you see a role? So a lot of our listeners, and also pure self-interest, because we build developer portals that are documentation sites. We use Drupal, so we have the potential to make highly structured documentation and highly structured content. How do you see that playing with a tool like what you're building? Are those complements, or how do you see that?
Absolutely. I think any order you can structure, that you explicit structure, right, that you can bring to a system is more than welcome. Because this idea that you have, at the start we talked about symbolic AI and kind of neural-based AI, right? You have neurosymbolic AI where you combine the two things. And I think that is extremely valuable approach, right? And there's lots of different ways to do that, but a very simple way to think of it is to say, okay, I have a knowledge graph that's explicit, that's been curated by human being, because there's only that the problem space, it's not the human knowledge, right? It is documents within an API portal and so on. So if I have this explicit representation of the relationships between different concepts and their relative importance and so on, and I can feed that into a prompt and combine it with a semantic search across a vector space of data, why wouldn't I do that? That's fantastic. So yeah, absolutely. I think the whole idea that we're just going to have unstructured data thrown into a bottomless pit and then somehow we're going to come back with something useful, no, it doesn't work.
Yeah. My biggest conclusion from last year's AI the Docs conference that we organized was we need even more structured documentation than we ever needed, because that's how all these technologies are actually going to work. And if you don't have that, then it's just, embrace the hallucinations otherwise.
Yeah, and the challenge we have right now is that structure. So people, what they will do, typical process is, I have 1,000 PDFs over here, feed them into model, create embeddings, and then I ask a question, and the answer is not what I expected. Yes, because you just gave it 1,000 PDFs with no guidance as to what is what. And it's doing its best, right? But that's all it can do. So then is post the fact, they realize, actually, we need to give this some structure. We need to create topics and so on. So yeah, absolutely. Like the idea of you have to be even more disciplined now, because it's not going to be a human being going through and reinserting that structure themselves. The LLM, as smart as it is, it can't do that yet.
Where do you see it going? What's your prognosis? Like, how fast is the bubble bursting, and how do we get through this? So, like, for the people that are excited about the possibilities of the technology, how do we weather the storm? Because there's the first storm, which was oh my God, everybody needs to do AI. I think the second storm will be, oh my God, what is this garbage? And like, get it out of here. How do we help customers to find their ways to the incredible value that is there, but it's just spoiled because of all the hype? And then how do we deal with this? Yeah, what's your take on that? How are you navigating that?
That's a slightly easier question, because we can get to the big stuff. Because I don't know what's going to happen there. But what we're finding within our small part of the world is finding the joy in the small things again. Like there's nothing that makes me happier than saying, we can solve this with the smallest possible LLM that you could imagine, right? Like it doesn't have to be 01 or 03 and do reasoning or whatever. It is a little fast, small model, and it solves a real user problem. And the way that the AI enters the process is organically, that you don't go look for the AI, you're just doing something. Maybe you're filling in a form or whatever activity it is, and something just happens. It says, looks like I don't know, you're not clear about, this is what this is, or I can, given what you've done already, I can do the rest for you. And then you continue, right? And it's just small moments of joy and interaction across a broader application that does a whole bunch of other things as well. That is incredibly valuable. The customers can understand it, users can trust it, it's reliable, it's not consuming more energy than is reasonable, and all those things. I think, and the reality is, despite all the hype, everything that's going on, the overwhelming majority of people are not doing anything. And so there's so much, even all this, I don't know how many hundreds of companies offering AI agent platforms and so on. There's all this hype, but once you go to, okay, who's using this? You're always hard pressed to say, oh, here's who's, very few organizations are actually using it. So I think there's this huge space where AI can enter the process sensibly, and it's part of a broader stack, and it works with existing applications. It doesn't try to replace them, and it's as much user experience as it is fancy technology in the back end. That's a space that we find is really interesting. It's actually easier to sell to because people get it immediately, as opposed when you go to them, and this is what we used to do initially, is partly we bought into the hype, right? So we're like, do everything, you should redo everything with our amazing agents. Look at this conversational interface, it's fantastic, and so on. And people will go, hold on, I just spent 2 years building something, and you're telling me now I have to throw all of this away and redo it with AI, which is going to be better. I'm not quite sure, right? Like, while a much more symbiotic relationship works much better, and it's easier to sell, and so on. In the broad space of the open AIs and so on, I'm very curious to see what's going to happen. One of the latest tidbits I heard is OpenAI saying we're going to sell PhD level agents for $20,000 a month. And I have real, I think maybe that's where the bubble bursts, because that's first of all, this human being, a bunch of PhDs right on, I don't know, Blue Sky and so on, saying, hire me. I will absolutely do that for you, $20,000 a month. But I don't know how many PhD level problems we have and how many people we have that can understand. So yes, it can go and work on it, but who's going to decipher the reams of stuff that it's doing? So I think there is little signals that something is not quite going in the right way. Stuff like that just seems like over-promising up front. Like, if you're going to do it, don't let it go out into the press. I was just using the research capability, or the deep research capability of ChatGPT to ask some health-related issues. And the last step that it was doing, and it spent several minutes on that step, it was applying HIPAA rules to the research. I said, what are you doing? Why are you, I assume you didn't go into any person's personal health records, right? I'm just using ChatGPT, but it spent minutes doing this because probably it hit some website that had some disclaimer that said you need to apply HIPAA when you do stuff. And then it went back to all the content, and it was applying HIPAA to the content that it just got off the open web. So there's stuff there that we need to figure out. And I don't know how all this is going to play out, but there's signals that it needs a readjustment. But I don't think it is too valuable. It will never go away. Like, we are in this world now. It's just that you're going to have a bit of a correction.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Is there still something that people should go check out? Like, you have a Substack, maybe people...
Please go sign up to my Substack.com. Even has its own domain, but it's a Substack. I write there, and I try to talk as openly as possible about these things. And if you are looking for conversational AI agents, I would be remiss not to mention my company, OpenDialog. But yeah, sign up to my Substack. I get excited.
And like the conversational agents, that doesn't only have to be for a conversation. Like you could use it as like several conversations that help you to achieve certain outcomes, or
yes, although we are, again, and I'm not a salesperson, so we are best suited. There's agents that just do back-end processes and never interact with a human being. There's other systems that do that. We're best suited for something that has a strong user
human
element, and then it can go and do stuff and come back and report, but there is that front-end human interaction as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Ronald. Great pleasure. Thanks for coming on, and go check that out. It's really cool stuff.
Amazing.
Thanks.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
That's it for this episode. This episode of the Resilience Podcast was brought to you by Pronovix. You can learn more about our company at pronovix.com, and thank you for listening.